In the summer of 1874, 300 masked riders gathered around the house of a black widower named Elias Mercer. They were sure they were going to capture an old carpenter who had nobody to help him. They formed a big circle around his small home, blocking every way out and shouting orders. They felt very confident because there were so many of them. Not one of those men knew that the traps built into the floor were professional military grade. They did not know that the man they were attacking had defeated entire enemy groups during the war. By the time the sun came up, the riders were the ones asking how their plan had failed. Their easy victory turned into a disaster where their leaders were exposed, their horses ran away, and their guns were useless. What did Elias Mercer do inside that house? Why did 300 men promise never to talk about what they saw that night? Before the story continues, tell us where you're watching from, and please subscribe because you do not want to miss the next story. The insects made their usual noise as Elias Mercer hit the last nail into his porch. The sound of the hammer went away into the warm Alabama night. He stood up slowly, feeling a sharp pain in his lower back. It was the kind of ache that reminded a man he was 55 years old. The new board fit perfectly. It was proof of many years of carpentry work that kept his hands busy and his mind focused since the war ended. Elias wiped his face with an old cloth. The summer heat was thick, even late at night. His small house sat on the edge of town, far enough away that he mostly heard only owls and bugs. He liked it that way. Being alone was easier than talking to people or seeing the way white people looked at him when he carried his tools through town. He put his tools away carefully in his leather bag. Everything had a special spot, just like his wife Miriam used to want. She had been gone for 3 years, but he still organized his life the way she liked. It made him feel better. These small habits made the quiet house feel less empty. The porch made a noise under his weight as he walked to the front door. His boots were covered in dust and red mud. Miriam would have been upset with him for bringing dirt inside. She would have made him leave them on the mat she made from corn husks. He still left them there every night to honor her memory and the 23 years they spent together. Inside the house, Elias lit one oil lamp. The light showed the simple room. There was a table and 2 chairs because he could not bring himself to take hers away. There was a stove and a small bed where he slept alone under a quilt Miriam had made. He had no photos, so he only had his memories. Sometimes that was enough, but most times it was not. He went to the window to close the shutters. The forest outside was dark and thick. The trees looked like tall guards against the sky. That was when he saw the lights. They were small and far away at first, moving through the trees. Elias stopped with his hand on the window latch. He thought they might be fireflies, but fireflies did not move in straight lines with a purpose. His heart started beating fast, a feeling he remembered from a long time ago. He forced himself to stay calm and watch. The lights grew in number. Soon there were hundreds of flames on poles coming through the woods. As they got closer, Elias saw the riders. They wore white robes and hoods. At least 300 men spread out in a circle around his home. They started shouting together. They called him a thief and a devil. Elias stepped away from the window. His mind started working like a soldier again, looking at every detail. 300 men meant this was a big, organized plan. This was not just a group of angry people. Someone was leading them. He moved through the house quickly and turned off the lamp. Being in the dark was better for him. He knew every part of this house, but the men outside did not. He locked the front door with a heavy wooden bar and did the same to the back. He closed all the shutters and reinforced them with wood. His hands were steady, which surprised him. After years of being a peaceful carpenter, his body still remembered how to be a soldier. He felt a cold focus instead of fear. Outside, the crowd started shouting a specific name, Thomas Whitfield. They claimed Elias was hiding a white teenager. It was a complete lie. Elias rarely spoke to any children in town. He stayed to himself and did his work. Looking through a small gap in the wood, he saw one rider move to the front. The man sat tall on his horse and looked like he was in charge. Elias recognized him as Judge Silas Brick. The judge had been trying to force Elias to sell his land for months. The judge held up a piece of paper and shouted that he had a legal right to search the house for the missing boy. Elias knew the paper was fake. The judge was famous for making up documents to trick people. Elias shouted back through the door that he was not hiding anyone and that he did not believe the warrant was real. The crowd got angry, and someone threw a bottle at the porch. The judge laughed and asked if Elias was questioning the law. Elias kept his voice calm and said he questioned a paper shown in the dark without a witness. The crowd moved closer. Elias picked up his rifle, but it was not loaded because he had promised his wife he would never keep loaded guns in the house. He wondered if he should break that promise now. Then one rider came forward and told the crowd to stop. It was Sheriff Asa Dalton. Elias knew him well. After the war, Elias had used his medical knowledge to save Asa's life when he was very sick. The sheriff walked to the door and asked to come in to talk. Elias wasn't sure if he could trust him, but Asa had always been respectful in the past. Elias let him in and locked the door quickly. Inside, the sheriff was breathing very hard and looked like he had been beaten recently. He told Elias that the whole story was a lie. The boy was not missing. He had simply run away from his father. The judge wanted the land because a new railroad was being built there. The judge had been spreading lies about Elias for weeks to make the town turn against him. Asa tried to get help from the government, but the judge had too much power. Asa came because he felt he owed Elias his life. The shouting outside got louder. People started shooting guns into the air. Asa said the mob was going to come in no matter what, and the judge would make sure any violence was called legal. Elias looked at the sheriff and realized that the peace he had tried to keep was over. He had to decide if he would be the carpenter his wife loved or the soldier he used to be. He looked at the floorboards where his old gear was hidden. He knew he could stop these men without killing them if he was smart. He began to prepare his defenses, using the tricks he learned during the war. He told the sheriff to stay down. The night was just beginning, and the 300 men outside had no idea what was waiting for them inside that quiet little house. Elias felt the old strength returning to his arms. He wasn't just a widower anymore. He was a man protecting his home. Elias went to the table and sat down heavily. For a long time, he said nothing. Outside, 300 men were shouting for blood. Inside, 2 men who had fought on the same side of a war faced the truth that the conflict had never really finished. "There is something you should know," Elias finally said. He stood up and walked to the corner of the house where his small bed was. With practiced skill, he pulled the bed frame away, showing floorboards that did not quite match the others. He lifted them up. Underneath was a shallow space he had carefully built. Inside were things Asa recognized from the war, a Union Scouts field kit, old but very well kept, a sword with an edge that shone even in the dark, leather bags containing unknown items, and a folded uniform. The sergeant's stripes were still there after years of storage. "During the war," Elias said quietly, "I went by a different name in the official records, but the enemy soldiers who lived through fights with my unit called me something else." He looked up at Asa. "They called me the Ghost." Asa's face went white. "That is not possible." The Ghost was a legend. Stories scared soldiers told around fires about a Union demon who could move like a shadow. He stopped, staring at Elias with new understanding. "My God, it was you. Sergeant Elias Mercer, 3rd United States Colored Troops attached to secret operations." Elias's voice stayed flat, but something had changed in the way he stood. The quiet carpenter was gone, showing the sharp edges of the soldier underneath. 47 confirmed disruptions of enemy supply lines. 63 successful scouting missions behind enemy positions. I could move through dangerous territory for weeks without being seen. They said you killed hundreds, Asa whispered. They told tall tales, Elias said, as he replaced the floorboards carefully. But I stopped enough enemy ambush groups that General Sherman himself wrote me a letter of praise. After the war, I disappeared, changed my name a little, and moved to places where nobody knew my face. Because every time someone recognized me, people died. Old enemies looking for revenge or former allies wanting me for new wars. I just wanted peace. Asa leaned against the wall, his mind moving fast. Those men out there have no idea what they are threatening. No, Elias agreed. They see an old black carpenter, easy prey. You could, Asa gestured at the hidden gear, you could kill half that mob before they even knew what was happening. I could, Elias's voice got hard, but my wife made me promise never to take another life after the war ended. I gave her my word. His hands tightened. And she has been dead 3 years, and I still cannot break that promise. Outside, Judge Brick's voice rose above the crowd. Sheriff Dalton, your time is up. Come out, or we are coming in. Asa straightened his shoulders. A choice showed in his face. He was still afraid, but something else was stronger. Let me try to make them leave. I will tell them about the boy and the judge's plan. There are good men in that crowd who will listen to sense. They will kill you, Elias said simply. Maybe. Asa picked up his hat, putting it on even though his hands were shaking. But maybe they will listen to a white man with a badge. Maybe I can talk to whatever goodness they have left. He looked at Elias. I have to try, because if I do not, I am just another coward who let this evil happen. Elias wanted to argue, to tell this brave, foolish man that angry mobs did not listen to reason, but he also understood the need to try, the human need to believe that people could change, even when it seemed impossible. He opened the door. Asa stepped out into the light, holding up both hands for peace. "Listen to me," he shouted. "All of you, listen." The noise went down a little. Elias watched through the window gap, his body ready for a fight. "There is no missing boy," Asa's voice went across the yard. "Thomas Whitfield ran away from home after his father beat him. Judge Brick knows this. He is using you for—" The first rock hit Asa's shoulder. He stumbled but kept talking. "He is using you to take this man's land for a railroad company. The paper is fake. This whole thing is—" Another rock hit his head. Blood sprayed. Asa fell to one knee. Judge Brick's voice cut through the noise. "The sheriff has been tricked. He is protecting a criminal." The mob moved forward. Men grabbed Asa, pulling him down. Fists and boots hit him. Asa's cries for peace turned into sounds of pain. Elias watched, his hands white against the window frame. Every part of him wanted to jump out and become the ghost again, to hurt the men who were beating a good person for telling the truth. But he had made a promise, and Asa was disappearing under the angry crowd. Asa's body went still under the mob's boots. Elias watched until he could not look anymore. He stepped back into the house, keeping his breathing steady even though he was furious. Talking was over. The carpenter's tools still sat on the table where he had put them. A level, a plane, and a box of nails, simple tools for building, now surrounded by men wanting to destroy. Elias looked at these tools, knowing what was coming next. Then he turned off the oil lamp. Darkness filled the room. Outside, the lanterns cast moving orange light through the cracks, making bars of light across the floor. Elias moved through these bars like water, silent and fast. He went to the wall first, where his coat and hat hung. He pulled a wooden peg down. Something clicked inside the wall. The shutters did not just close, they locked into metal brackets hidden in the frames. This turned thin wood into strong barriers backed by iron. He had saved the metal from an old army depot years ago and installed it during the nights when he could not sleep. Elias moved to the next wall and pulled another peg. These shutters had tiny holes at eye level that opened only from the inside, so he could see out without being shot. He had designed them after seeing enemy forts during the war. The other wall had no windows, but pressing a certain floorboard opened hidden vents near the roof. These could move smoke or provide air during a fight. It had seemed like too much when he built them, but Elias had learned that being ready was the only way to survive. He knelt by his bed and pulled up the boards again. His hands found familiar things in the dark. Metal spikes he had made himself, designed so one point always faced up. A bag of homemade smoke balls made of clay and wood shavings. Rope traps he could pull from a distance. Other things designed by a man who promised his wife not to kill, but who still knew how to fight. "I am not breaking my word, Miriam," he whispered, "but I am not going to die either." Outside, Judge Brick shouted that the sheriff had betrayed them and was corrupted by lies. The mob cheered. Elias heard Asa groan, so he knew the sheriff was still alive. The judge told the crowd that Elias was a threat to every family and that he was hiding criminals. Someone fired a gun into the air, and others started shouting to burn the house down. Elias moved to his defensive spot in a corner of the house where the beams were strongest. During the war, he had slept in much worse places, holes in the ground, inside trees, and even under a house where enemy officers were drinking right above him. This house was like a fortress compared to those spots. The first real attack started with axes hitting the front door. The blades cut into the wood, shaking the house. Elias expected this. He had hidden strong crossbeams inside the door that they could not see yet. They would get in eventually, but it would take time he could use. Gunshots followed. Bullets broke the glass in the windows and hit the walls. None hit Elias because he stayed low, knowing that angry men usually aimed too high. He counted the shots and realized there were about 20 or 25 men with guns. It was dangerous but manageable if he stayed smart. He pulled a rope along the wall. It was connected to other ropes under the porch. The front part of the porch, which he had already weakened with a saw, crashed down. 6 men who were trying to break the door fell into a pit. It was not deep enough to kill them, but they were out of the fight. Their screams joined the noise of the crowd. Before they could understand what happened, Elias started his smoke vents. He dropped his homemade smoke balls into the channel and lit the fuse. Thick gray smoke poured out into the yard. It was not poisonous, but nobody could see anything. Men coughed and ran into each other and their horses. Elias felt a small bit of pride. His wife said not to kill, but she did not say anything about making violent men look like fools. The second group tried the windows, hitting them with clubs and rifles. They found the hidden iron the hard way, and their hands went numb from the impact. One man tried to pry a shutter open, but his fingers hit the sharp metal spikes Elias had put there. He screamed and ran. No one was dead yet, so the promise was kept. But the mob was learning. Judge Brick was organizing them, telling them to be more strategic. They brought a big log to use as a ram against the door. The door held for now, but not forever. Elias checked his supplies. Dawn was still far away, and the mob was not stopping. He knew the fight would get much worse. They would bring fire soon. He leaned against the wall and calmed his breathing. His body remembered how to be in a war. Outside, 300 men were still howling for his life. "They do not know that the war never truly finished for me." The battering ram hit the house again. This time the outside wood of the door broke apart completely, showing the strong crossbeam I had hidden behind it. The crowd yelled, thinking they were close to winning. I put my next smoke ball into the vent and waited for them to make their next error. The first sign of morning was not light, but a change in the darkness. The pitch black that had hidden the house started to thin. I pressed my face against one of the small spy holes I had made in the shutters. I looked at the fog coming in from the creek. It mixed with the smoke from my traps, creating a thick gray cloud that hid everything past 20 feet. These were perfect conditions for me and terrible for a mob that needed to see to feel brave. I moved back and went to my water pitcher. I drank slowly, saving the supply because I knew this could last a long time. The water was warm and tasted like clay, but it helped me think clearly. My left arm hurt where a hot coal had hit me. When the mob tried to push burning sticks through the broken window, one piece bounced off the metal reinforcement and caught my sleeve. I put it out fast, but it left a red burn on my skin. It was not bad. I had suffered worse while cooking. I wrapped it with a piece of an old shirt, my hands working quickly while I listened to the noise outside. The mob was getting organized again. I could hear Judge Brick's voice giving orders and putting men in positions. The judge was smarter than I expected. He was learning from his mistakes and changing his plan, which made him dangerous. Someone in the yard shouted for oil to soak rags and wrap them around arrows. I smiled, but not because I was happy. They were getting creative. I moved to the wall where I had built one of my best defenses, a series of water tanks hidden in the roof. Each tank held about 3 gallons of rainwater. To my neighbors, it looked like a simple plumbing idea, but it was actually for a fight. I had put them in spots where people would likely start fires. I had handles inside the house that allowed me to dump the water exactly where I needed it. I had tested it many times to make sure the water would cover the outside walls. The first fire arrow hit the wall. The oil rag burned brightly, but I pulled a hidden lever. The tank above it tipped over, releasing a flood of water that put out the fire instantly. The fire died with a loud hiss, and the mob shouted in disappointment. They tried the other side next with 3 arrows. I triggered 2 more tanks at once. The water fell down, putting out the fires and soaking several men who were standing too close. Someone yelled that I had water stored up there, but the judge told them to keep firing because they had more oil than I had water. He was right. I only had 6 tanks. If they kept attacking with fire, I would run out. But every failure made them more afraid and made them wonder about the man they were attacking. A sudden burst of rifle fire hit the front of the house. This was not aimed shooting. They were just trying to keep me pinned down. Dozens of bullets hit the windows and walls. I dropped to the floor and crawled toward my watch station. Bullets flew over my head and hit the back wall, showering me with wood splinters. This was a tactic I had seen in the war, keep the enemy busy in the front while moving in from another side. I crawled through the small space by my bed, moving like a shadow. My body remembered how to stay small and move without making a sound. Through the cracks in the floor, I heard boots moving toward the back of the house. At least 4 men were trying to be quiet, thinking the gunshots would hide their noise. I reached my back spy hole, a tiny gap near the floor that was invisible from the outside. I saw 5 men in the fog. One had a big hammer, and another had a metal bar. They planned to break through the back while the others shot at the front. The shooting stopped suddenly, timed perfectly for the back attack. My hand found the rope I had hidden under the roof. I had told people it was for laundry, and it was true I used it for that. But it was also a trap I designed after studying a cavalry mechanism in the war. It was a loop connected to a heavy weight in the attic. I pulled the trigger rope. The loop tightened around 2 men at once, and the weight dropped. The rope pulled both men 6 feet into the air in a second, hanging them upside down. Their screams broke the silence. The other 3 men fell back in shock. One tripped in the mud, and another ran into a tree branch and knocked himself out. The 2 men hanging in the air spun around, yelling for help. They were not hurt, but they looked very foolish. The shooting started again from the front, but now it sounded panicked. The mob's discipline was falling apart. I heard the judge screaming for them to stay in control, but fear was spreading. I looked through the front hole and saw men backing away, looking at the house like it was haunted. Someone muttered that no normal man could know where they were coming from every time. They started talking about spirits and magic protecting me. The judge rode his horse through the crowd, his face purple with anger. He called them cowards and said I was just a man with tricks. But his words did not help. They had expected an easy target and found a fort. By the middle of the morning, the fog was gone, but most of the men had left too. Only about 50 men were still in the yard. Their courage was gone. The judge realized he was losing and told the remaining men to hold their ground while he rode to town to get reinforcements that would not be scared of a carpenter. He galloped away, leaving the rest of the mob looking confused. Some of the men sat in the grass. Others helped the hanging men get down. My attention was caught by movement near the barn. Someone was crawling through the grass very slowly. It was Sheriff Asa Dalton. He was alive, but he was moving like every bone in his body was broken. He was trying to reach the barn for safety. None of the mob noticed him because they were too busy arguing. I watched him and calculated how to help. He had about 30 more feet to go. I waited for the right moment. The men were clumped together by the road, not paying attention to the house anymore. I remembered the drainage ditch I had dug 2 years ago. It ran from the house to the barn. It was only 2 feet deep, but I had covered it with branches so it looked like normal ground. I moved to a small hidden panel in the wall and squeezed through it into the ditch. I crawled on my belly, moving slowly and patiently. The earth smelled like rain. It took me 20 minutes to reach Asa. He was lying face down, breathing hard. I touched his shoulder. He jumped in fear, but then saw it was me. I told him I had a path and asked if he could crawl. He nodded weakly. I helped him into the ditch and covered us with branches. We moved back to the house together. I helped him inside and put him on my bed. He groaned, but tried to sit up. I told him to stay still and brought some water and clean cloth. I used what I knew about medicine from the war to clean his face and check his injuries. He was badly bruised and his nose was broken, but he was going to live. He looked at me with a mix of respect and exhaustion. We were both still alive, and the sun was high in the sky. The judge went for more men, Asa said while Elias worked. I heard him mention something about a federal marshal, someone he has connections with. Elias's hand stopped for a moment, then went back to cleaning a cut above Asa's ear. Federal involvement changes everything. Everything always changes things. Asa winced as Elias touched a sore spot on his jaw. I should have changed things years ago. I should have stood up to Brick the first time he faked legal papers. I should have protected families like yours instead of— He stopped talking, staring at nothing, instead of being too afraid to lose my job. You came here to warn me, Elias said quietly. That matters. Does it? Asa's good eye looked at Elias with deep feeling. How many black families were driven off their land while I looked away? How many times did I follow laws I knew were being twisted to help men like Brick? He shook his head a little, immediately felt pain, and groaned. You fought for the Union, risked everything to stop slavery, and men like me just let it continue in different clothes. Elias wrapped a clean cloth around Asa's ribs to help the pain from what was likely a cracked bone. War taught me something about cowardice, he said. It taught me it is not the same as evil. Cowards can change. Evil does not want to. Asa was quiet for a long time. Then I admire you, Elias, not just for the soldier you were, but the man you became after, living quietly, keeping your word to your wife, building something good despite— He pointed toward the closed windows where the mob still waited. Despite all this. Good men do not usually have to build fortresses, Elias said. Maybe that is exactly when they must. Outside, the voices got louder. Elias moved to his front spy hole and looked out. The scattered mob members were standing up now, looking toward the road. Dust rose in the distance as riders approached, maybe a dozen or more. But other movement caught his eye. From the east, a different group was coming on foot. It was townsfolk who had heard news of the fight. Elias saw many faces he knew. White store owners, a minister, and families who had bought furniture he had made. They stood at the edge of the property, not sure about getting close to the armed mob, but not wanting to leave. Among them, standing apart but watching closely, several black families had gathered. Elias saw old Thomas from the mill, Martha Washington, who sold vegetables, and the Freeman brothers who worked the railroad. They stayed a safe distance from the white people, but their presence was important. They knew what happened here mattered to everyone. The riders from the west arrived. Judge Brick led them, looking very happy. Behind him was a thin man in a dark suit carrying an official bag. The federal marshal. Asa struggled to stand up, even though Elias tried to help him. "I need to be standing," he said. "I need to stop this before—" "Before what?" Elias asked. But he already knew. The judge got off his horse and started talking to the mob, pointing and shouting. The marshal stayed on his horse, watching the scene calmly. Elias helped Asa to the door. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Asa said, "but I'm doing it anyway." They stepped outside together. The morning sun showed everyone Asa's beaten face. People gasped. Asa raised his voice and spoke with strength despite his pain. "This attack is built on lies. The boy is not missing. He ran away. The judge made up evidence to steal this man's land. I came here to stop violence and was beaten for telling the truth." The people whispered. Many nodded. The men who had beaten Asa looked worried, realizing they had gone too far by attacking a white sheriff. Judge Brick's face turned purple. "This man blocked justice," he yelled. "He interfered with a search." Asa interrupted him. "That is what you brought here, Silas. 300 men to scare one citizen because you want his land for a railroad." The whispering grew louder. Doubt spread through the crowd. The judge's power was fading because of the sheriff's simple truth. For a moment, it seemed the mob might give up. Then Judge Brick stepped aside and pointed to the federal marshal. "That is why I brought the real authority. Federal power that is higher than local feelings." The marshal moved his horse forward. He pulled papers from his bag with official movements. His voice was cold and precise. "Elias Mercer, you are under federal arrest for hiding a runaway minor and resisting a legal search of your property." The crowd went silent as Marshal Harlan Briggs opened the paper. He was tall and looked about 50, with gray hair and a hard face. His uniform was very clean. He looked like a man who was used to being obeyed. "Elias Mercer," he repeated. "You are charged with hiding a child, Samuel Pritchard, age 14, who ran away on June 7th. Also, you are charged with resisting officers who tried to find him." Elias felt a cold feeling in his chest. The words were official. The paper looked real. The marshal believed what he was saying. This was not just a mob anymore. This was the law itself, being used as a weapon. Asa moved forward, almost falling. "That is all made up. The boy ran away on his own. He is not even here. This is a land grab." Two of the judge's men grabbed Asa's arms. He fought a little, but he was too hurt, and they were too many. They put metal handcuffs on him. "Sheriff Dalton," Marshal Briggs said coldly, "you are interfering. Sit down or face more charges. Federal investigation." Asa spat blood. "You are reading lies written by the judge." The men forced him to his knees. The marshal did not even look at him. He kept looking at Elias. He saw this as just another job to finish. Judge Brick stepped forward, looking proud. "As you can see, the suspect will not cooperate. The house must be searched. Burn it if you have to get the boy out. Burn it." Briggs looked at the judge. "That is not how we do things." "The suspect is an arsonist who threatened to burn the evidence," the judge said smoothly. "I have witnesses who say so." More lies were being piled up until they felt real. Elias watched the judge work, seeing how he tricked even the federal marshal. The law was being used as a cover for a crime. The mob moved forward when the judge signaled. Several men had torches they had made earlier. The marshal did not stop them. His job was the warrant, not how they did it. Elias backed into his house and locked the door. He heard them laughing. Through the hole, He saw the first torch hit his porch. The dry wood started burning fast. He stood in the middle of the house he had built with his own hands, the place where he and Miriam had lived. Smoke started coming through the floor as the fire grew. His wife's voice came to his memory. "Promise me you will never kill again. Build instead of destroy." He had kept that promise for 10 years. He believed peace was possible if he just stayed quiet. But peace needs 2 people to agree. One person cannot do it alone. The heat got stronger. Flames climbed the walls. He grabbed blankets to hit the fire, but there were too many. The mob was not just trying to smoke him out anymore. They were destroying the whole house. Smoke filled the room. Elias got down low on the floor where there was still air. His eyes and lungs burned. The heat was like a physical weight. He crawled toward the corner where a heavy chest sat. He had hoped he would never need what was under it. He pushed the chest away, and the sound was lost in the roar of the fire. Under it, a floorboard came up, showing a dark hole, the escape tunnel. He had dug it during his first year, working at night so no one would know. It went 60 feet under the ground and came out in the trees behind his land. He had built it with wood supports and hidden air holes. The opening was just wide enough for him. Elias went down into the dark and pulled the floor shut. The firelight vanished. He crawled on his elbows in the dark. The ceiling was very close to his back. Roots hit his face. The ground was hard clay that hurt his hands. Behind him, he heard the wood of his house falling. Everything he had built was turning to ash because powerful men decided he shouldn't be there. The tunnel felt like it went on forever. He breathed in gasps because of the smoke he had inhaled. The darkness was so thick he lost his sense of direction. His hand touched some water from a leak, and he used it to cool his eyes. Then he kept moving. The tunnel started to go up. Fresh air reached him. It smelled sweet and clean. He moved faster, even though he was tired. He pushed up on the hidden door at the end, which was covered in moss and leaves. It opened. The afternoon sun hit his face. He pulled himself out of the ground, covered in dirt and ash, finally free of the fire. Behind him through the trees, he could see his house completely covered in fire. Black smoke rose high into the sky, visible for miles. The mob stood in a semicircle around the burning building with their backs to him. They were cheering. Judge Brick's voice rose above the rest, shouting, "Justice has been served." The marshal sat on his horse at a distance, watching the destruction with a look of discomfort, but he did not step in to stop it. Elias knelt in the shadows of the woods, breathing air that tasted of freedom and loss. His home was gone. The law had been used against him. An innocent man had been arrested for telling the truth, and somehow Elias had lived through it. He stayed perfectly still, watching them celebrate what they thought was his death, and he began to realize exactly what he had to do next. Elias remained motionless in the dark, letting his breathing get steady while his mind looked at everything through the trees. The mob had broken into smaller groups now that they believed he was dead. Some stood near the burning house, poking at the wood with their guns. Others had gone to the shade, drinking whiskey and telling themselves they were doing the right thing. Judge Brick stood away from the common men, surrounded by his personal guards near an old barn 40 yards away. The barn was used for storage for another property, but the judge had taken it over as his headquarters. Elias could see movement through the open doors, men coming and going with purpose rather than the drunken behavior of the rest of the group. Marshal Briggs stayed on his horse near the road, his body stiff. He wasn't celebrating or joining the party. He was just watching with a look Elias knew from the war, the look of a man who had followed orders and was now wondering if those orders were a mistake. Through the trees, he saw Asa being pulled toward a wagon, his hands still tied. Some people from the town had started arguing with the mob. White women from the church and older men who had been in the war and knew the difference between the law and a mob. The crowd was splitting apart, but the judge's power was still enough to keep them from doing anything. Elias knew what he needed: Asa had mentioned it before. The judge kept a book of all his crimes and plans. It was his insurance against the people he worked with, the kind of proof corrupt men kept because they didn't trust anyone. That book would be in the barn. It had to be. The judge wouldn't leave it anywhere else while he was doing something this public. Elias started moving through the woods near the mob, using the tricks he learned in the army. He stayed low and moved when it was noisy. He never walked into the open where someone might see him. The skills came back instantly, like he had never stopped being a soldier. He went around the long way, approaching the barn from the back where there were no windows. The building was old and poorly built. The support beams had cracks and the roof was sagging. It wouldn't take much to make it fall. 5 men guarded the front, but the back was empty. Elias crawled through the wet grass until he reached the wall. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened. He heard voices inside. Someone was counting money and someone else was complaining about the heat. Because the barn was poorly made, there were gaps between the boards that let him see inside. The judge stood at a desk made of a board across 2 barrels, looking at papers. The book sat right beside him. Elias looked at the barn with a carpenter's eye. The main posts were not deep enough in the ground. Many beams were cut wrong, making them weak. The whole thing was ready to fall over. He just needed to hit the right spots. He worked silently, using a piece of broken glass to cut through the rope holding a main brace. It wasn't enough to make it fall now, just enough to make it unsteady. He loosened the stakes holding the posts and figured out which boards to pull to make the structure fail without hitting anyone's head. The horses were another chance. 12 horses were tied up nearby, still saddled. Elias had trained horses in the war and knew how to scare them. He needed smoke and a distraction. He had hidden supplies all over his land years ago just in case. He found a waterproof box buried near the trees. It had clay pots filled with sulfur and charcoal. These were not bombs, just things that made a lot of thick smoke. He put 3 pots in important spots, one by the horses, one by the barn corner, and one on the path to the road. He prepared the triggers to start the smoke when pulled. The sun was lower now. The mob was getting drunk and arguing. Some wanted to go home, but others wanted to find Elias's body in the fire. Marshal Briggs was talking to some townspeople who had brought food. The talk looked tense. Sometimes Briggs would look at the judge with a hard face. Elias moved to the loft of the barn, a small opening for hay. He climbed a rotten ladder silently, testing every step. Inside, he could look down at the judge. The book was now under the man's arm as he gave orders. Perfect. When the trouble started, the judge would hold onto that book like a lifeline. Elias pulled the first string. The smoke pot near the horses started. Thick gray smoke filled the air with a bad smell. The horses got scared immediately, pulling at their ropes and screaming. The ropes snapped, and the horses ran in every direction, hitting men and knocking things over. Elias pulled the second string. Smoke poured out at the barn door, making it impossible to see. Men stumbled around, coughing and confused. The judge shouted, but nobody could hear him. He moved toward the back exit with the book held tight. That is when Elias pulled the third string and kicked the weak post next to him. The barn didn't fall down completely, but it groaned and shifted. The beams dropped a few inches, jamming the doors shut and trapping the men inside. They weren't hurt, but they were stuck and very scared. Elias dropped from the loft through the back hole and landed right behind the judge. Brick turned around, his eyes wide with fear. He reached for his gun, but Elias was faster. He grabbed the judge's wrist and controlled it. "Drop it," Elias said quietly. The gun fell to the dirt. The judge's face was white. His power was gone, leaving only a man who had lost everything. "The book," Elias said, holding out his hand. Brick held it tighter. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "This town needs me." Elias twisted the man's wrist just enough to make the book fall. Elias caught it and stepped back. Around them, everything was a mess. Horses were running everywhere and men were trapped in the barn. Smoke was everywhere. Marshal Briggs appeared through the smoke with his gun out. He looked at the judge, then at Elias, then at the book in a black man's hand. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Elias held out the book. "I believe this belongs to your investigation, Marshal." Briggs took it slowly and opened the first page. His face got very dark. "My God," he whispered. "This book has every bribe, every fake paper, and the name of every man who helped with this violence," Elias said. "It even shows how federal power was bought to steal land." The marshal looked at the judge. "Is this true?" Brick tried to act tough again. "That man is a criminal." "Shut your mouth!" Briggs yelled. He told his deputies to arrest Judge Brick for a federal investigation. The judge's shouting turned to anger as the handcuffs clicked. The sound made everyone stop. The men in the barn went quiet. Asa appeared, leaning on a cane, his face covered in bruises. He looked at Elias with relief. "You're alive." "Are you disappointed?" Elias asked. "I'm relieved," Asa said. "I thought when I saw the fire that you were gone." Elias looked at what was left of his house. The walls were black and the roof was gone. Everything inside was ash. The mob began to run away into the woods. Some rode off on horses, and others just walked away in shame. But the townspeople stayed. They all looked at Elias as he walked toward his ruined home. Marshal Briggs called out, "Mr. Mercer, I need to talk to you." Elias paused, but didn't turn around. "Tomorrow. Right now, I need to see what's left." The marshal nodded. "Tomorrow. And Mr. Mercer, I am sorry. I should have checked those papers before." "You should have." Elias kept moving. The front steps of the house had burned away. He went around to the side door, checking the wood before stepping on it. The door frame was still standing, and he pushed through into what used to be his home. Smoke was still coming from the fallen wood. The table where he had eaten his morning meal was just charcoal. The chairs Miriam had wanted to buy, even though they cost a lot, were gone. The bedroom where she had passed away was buried under the roof. Everything turned to ash and memory. He knelt near what had been their bed, moving the trash with careful hands. The metal frame was still there, twisted by the heat. The blanket her mother had made was ruined. But there, under a fallen beam and protected by the iron bed, was the small wooden box where he kept her letters. He pulled it out. The outside was burned, but when he opened it, the letters inside were safe. It was her handwriting. Her voice was kept on paper. His hands shook as he held them. He heard footsteps behind him, but did not turn. "Elias," Asa's voice was soft. "Some people want to speak with you if you are ready." Elias closed the box carefully and stood up. When he walked out of the ruins, he found a group gathered in his yard. Black families from church stood next to white neighbors he had worked for. Even some people who had only watched from far away had joined them. An older black woman came forward with a basket. "We brought food. We thought you would need something." She pointed at the damage, unable to say more. A white man Elias had built a barn for cleared his throat. "Some of us want to help rebuild if you will let us. I know words don't fix what happened, but—" "No," Elias said quietly. "Words don't fix it." The man looked sad, but Elias continued, "But actions might start to." Elias looked at the group. Some looked at him and others looked away. "I will take the help, but I need to know it is real, that it comes from knowing what happened here was wrong, not just against the law. Wrong." Many people nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. Asa stepped forward with his cane. "I failed you. I should have done more. I should have stood up to the judge years ago instead of—" His voice stopped. "Instead of being a coward." "You came when it mattered," Elias said. "The question is if you will let us." He looked at the group, at the nails someone had already saved from the ashes, and at the new wood stacked near the foundation. His pride was there, but he was very tired. I would be thankful for the help. The work started right away. Men moved the broken roof beams, saving what wood they could. Women organized the food and tasks. Children carried water from the well, making the place feel almost normal again. Elias moved among them, looking at the foundation. The stone base was still good. His grandfather had built it to last. The floor needed to be replaced, but the main posts could be used if cleaned. "Foundation first," he shouted. "We rebuild from the bottom up. Do it right, and it will stand another 100 years. A younger black man named Isaiah, who had watched the fight from the woods, came forward. "I worked on buildings in Montgomery. I know how to do a foundation." "Then you are my leader for the morning." Elias gave him a string. "Mark where the new posts go. We will dig before it gets too hot." The work fell into a rhythm. Hammers hit nails. People talked. It was the sound of building something new from what was lost. Asa arrived in the middle of the morning, still limping and bruised. He watched for a while before walking to Elias, who was moving a beam. "I didn't think this many people would show up," Asa said. "Neither did I." Elias checked the beam and told the crew to lock it down. "But here they are. I need to ask you something." Asa's voice got lower. "The marshal wants to hear everything that happened from the start." Elias wiped sweat from his head. "All right. It might take a long time." "It will require you to remember last night in detail," Asa said. "I understand." Elias looked at the work. "But not today. Today I need to build tomorrow. The marshal is staying in town until we have everyone's story." Asa shifted his weight. "He is taking this seriously, Elias. More than I thought. We will see." Elias didn't fully trust it yet. Being serious is easy when people are watching. Real change happens when no one is looking. Asa nodded. He looked at the workers. Some of these people were in the mob last night. Elias saw a man named Crawford digging and another named Thompson carrying wood. Men who had held lanterns and shouted threats were now working hard. "I know," Elias said. "The question is if they understand why they are here. Are they building because they are ashamed or because they see it was wrong? Does it matter if the work gets done?" "Yes," Elias said. "It matters. Shame goes away. Understanding stays." Across the yard, Marshal Briggs had a tent. A line of men waited to speak. Some were nervous. Asa went to help, and Elias went back to the foundation. By noon, the base was ready. The crew stopped for lunch. They ate cornbread and beans. People sat together, black and white, talking about what had happened. Elias heard them saying they didn't know the papers were fake or that they just got caught up in the anger. Crawford walked up to Elias. The man held his hat, and his face was red. "Mr. Mercer, I need to say, I was wrong. Last night I believed things I shouldn't have. I am ashamed." Elias looked at him. "Why did you believe it?" Crawford looked away. "The judge said you were dangerous, said you were a criminal, said we had to act before—" He stopped. "Before what?" Elias asked. "Before I did what? Before I lived quietly on my land? Before I built furniture? I don't know," Crawford whispered. "I just got caught up in the fear he talked about." "Fear of what?" The man couldn't answer. "That's what you need to figure out," Elias said. "Not just that you were wrong, but why you were so ready to believe a lie. Why you didn't ask questions until the house was on fire." Crawford nodded with tears in his eyes. "I will figure it out. I promise." "Then get back to work. Fix it with actions, not words." The afternoon went fast. The foundation took shape. New posts were set. It wouldn't be done today, but the frame of a new home was rising. Children talked to Elias during a break. A young girl asked if he was a soldier. "I was." "Were you scared?" a boy asked. "Every day," Elias said. "Fear keeps you careful. It is what you do with it that matters. My uncle says the war was to free people. the girl said. Was it? The adult stopped to listen. War is never necessary the way people say, Elias said slowly. But sometimes it is the only choice when talking stops. When people in power won't see others as human. Some wars aren't worth doing again. The trick is learning the lesson the first time. The work started again. By late afternoon, the foundation was done. Tomorrow, they would start the walls. Marshal Briggs walked out of his tent with the judge in handcuffs. A wagon was waiting to take him away. The worksite went quiet. The judge looked ahead with a hard face, but Elias saw the fear. He saw a man who lost his power. "Mr. Mercer," the marshal said, "I need that talk tomorrow morning at 9. I'll be there." The wagon drove away. People started whispering about trials and change. Elias watched the wagon leave, then turned back to his new home. 1 week passed since the base was laid, 7 days of hard work and shared meals. Each board was a sign that they could rebuild. Elias's new house was almost done. The walls were strong pine, the roof was finished. The porch was wider than before, wrapping around the house. Inside it was still empty, but the building was strong. It was built by many hands working together. People called it Mercer's Stand, but Elias didn't like the name. He said it was about people choosing to build instead of burn. On the 7th day, Elias stood on his new porch. "Beautiful work," he said to Isaiah. "I learned from you," Isaiah smiled. A wagon approached with Sheriff Asa Dalton. He looked stronger now. The federal people had made him the official sheriff. He climbed the steps carefully. "Place looks great." "Getting there. Sit down," Elias said. Asa sat with a sigh. "It's been a long week. I haven't slept much. Did you find out anything new?" "The judge's network was big," Asa said. "He faked papers for 17 properties and bribed many officials. The marshal is going to review all land deals from the last 5 years to make sure families get their land back." Elias looked at the paper Asa gave him. His name was on it, protecting his land. "They are also making rules for the police and land deals," Asa said. "It won't fix everything, but it's a start. And they offered me the permanent job as sheriff. They said I showed courage. I don't know if I deserve it after staying silent so long." "Deserving isn't the point," Elias said. "The question is if you will do the work. Will you stand up next time before the fire starts?" "I will," Asa said. "I swear." "Then take the job. Use it for good." They sat in silence as the work ended for the day. Workers were cleaning up. Elias thought about the cost. His home was gone, and he was tired. He remembered the fire and how he almost gave up. But he chose to live and keep his promise of peace. He had won by refusing to be a monster. He felt Miriam with him. "You stayed human," she would say. He hadn't forgotten. Even with 300 lanterns against him, he had found a way to protect himself without becoming violent. "Are you thinking about her?" Asa asked. Elias nodded, wondering if she would be proud. "She would be," Asa said. "You proved that strength doesn't have to mean killing." "I had help." Elias pointed to the neighbors. "I couldn't do it alone." "That's the lesson," Asa said. "We are only strong together." As the sun went down, families arrived for dinner. It was a tradition now, eating together on Elias's land. Women set out food, children ran around. Black and white families, people who were strangers a week ago, were now sharing stories. Elias walked among them, thanking everyone. He watched the children and listened to people talking about the future. They talked about protecting rights and making sure this never happened again. As it got dark, lanterns were lit. The light was soft and welcoming, not like the fire from before. Families sat on the porch to listen to the elders. Elias sat in his chair, watching it all. The home was rebuilt stronger. Asa joined him one last time. "You did something great here, Elias." "We did," Elias corrected. "All of us together." After everyone went home, Elias stayed on his porch. The night was quiet. He thought about the war, about Miriam, and about the man he chose to be. 300 lanterns had tried to destroy him, but they had revealed something stronger than hate. Stars came out. Elias spoke quietly to the dark. Some wars you win by refusing to fight the way they want you to. The words felt right. It was a truth earned through fire, a new life built not on violence, but on the hard work of choosing peace. He sat there in the dark, watching over his home and the people who made it possible. He had survived without losing himself.